Hey everybody, Quantum here, and as per the recent poll that I put up at the start of June 2025, most of you voted to see a Ruby Steel deck list and some gameplay, so hopefully the gameplay will be coming soon. I do have two lists for Ruby Steel that I'm going to review with you. One of them is public and one of them is private, so for the members of the channel, or if you're watching this after this video is public, if you become a member of the YouTube channel, you do get first dibs and early access to a lot of the lists and stuff that I'm working on if you want to see it. And of course, as with every one of the deck profiles, we try to break it down and talk about the interactions and what's relevant in the meta, at least at the time. So with that out of the way, let's get into it here. So I did test this a little bit. I took it online. I went 1 and 2, so not great. I did go 0 and 1 to start, and I changed the list. I got still blown out by Emerald Steel discard, unfortunately. But I did beat a Steel Song, which is surprising, but some of it might have been because they didn't play optimally. Like I think their draws weren't the greatest. And I did have answers. The Li Shang here actually put in some decent work in that match, and then I lost against a Blurple deck. Unfortunately, they just outdrew me, and dealt with my board. So there's still some holes in the Ruby Steel list and some things that I need to work out. But I do think this has potential. And if you do get set up with this deck list, and we'll talk about some of the setups that you can go for, it can be quite powerful. But let's go ahead and break down the cost curve here. So you can see it's primarily steel, a decent number of dual ink in this version. I'm calling it Ruby Steel Mushu, and then just a couple of Ruby cards, only 8. Quite heavy on the 3 cost, but as a tempo-oriented deck, you're playing a standard of like 8 to 10 1-drops, 8 2-drops, again, a lot of 3-drops, and then you kind of fall off on the 4-drop slot here because you're so high on 3. If you end up playing something on 3 on turn 4, that's also okay. The 5-drops as well, you're on 8, and then just about 8 or so 6-drops also. Well, 7 6-drops. So we're going to cover this here. A decent amount of inkables in 51 and only 9 on inkables for a total of 60. Primarily a character-based deck, which is a couple of actions and a couple of songs. No matter how I ended up trying to build this deck, it always came back to one key concept, and that was utilizing Maui Shark, Namaari, and the Desperate Plan. I think the package of Namaari and Desperate Plan in Steel, along with this Mulan, is going to be quite good moving forward, especially after rotation. So you're hearing it here first, maybe. I haven't heard it anywhere else, but this card has been going up in price. It's come down a little bit. But if you don't have these, I think this card, especially if Beast Tragic Hero doesn't get reprinted, is going to be a key card in Steel. And Desperate Plan, every time I've used this card, it's been incredible. It's been like a game-winning card. So again, not just in this Ruby Steel deck, because like I said, I've only played 3 matches online. It's very hard to play a deck like this online since everybody's like, I don't want to say meta slave, but like it's very meta heavy. You can't really test this against some other things in the meta. Usually everyone's just playing what they think is the top deck usually. But in more, not I don't want to say casual testing, but in testing against a broader meta game, like against aggro and stuff, this deck should do very, very well. So if you're in a local meta where there's aggro, you can already tell, right? Like we're going to go over it here. It's going to do pretty well. So we'll cover this list, like I said, then we'll cover the other one. But to start off, Captain Hooks. There is a couple of different 1-drops that you could play in this lot. The Captain Hook is what I settled on because even into the late game, playing this card out is actually not that bad. Same with the Mulan. So you got 2 cards that generally you can play into the mid to late games and they still have utility versus other 1-drops, they're just not great. Like I was considering using the Simba, the 1-2 Simba, but until we get a good shift Simba, I just think the 1-2 stat line is just not great. The 2-1 on the Mulan for the same ability of draw and discard is just way more useful, and you'll see that play out if you test this deck. The Captain Hook also being a captain helps for the Mr. Smee because you also have Li Shang, which is also a captain. So you have a number of ways to protect damage from hitting the Mr. Smee, which is good. I mean, this card is going to get rotated out. There's no chance this gets reprinted. It's literally been the best 2-drop in the game since it was released. Yeah, the card is insanely good, and it's one of the reasons that you can play Steel because you can get so much early aggression off of this card. So of course you're playing 4 of it. The Coachman is also an interesting card. I've talked about this interaction before. As a 2-cost 2/2, it's pretty good, but it becomes a 4/2 with evasive when you have 2 exerted characters on board. What's interesting about this card, and I'll explain this interaction again, is that if you have, let's say, any of these 1-drops, let's say the Mulan, and then you play a Coachman, and then on turn 3 you drop like a Mushu or a Li Shang or something. If you turn your Mulan sideways, that's 1 exerted character. So your Coachman here doesn't get the +2 and evasive yet. But if you turn the coachman sideways to challenge a character that does not have evasive, when the challenge actually registers in game, the coachman will have the +2 strength and evasive. So if I end up challenging, let's say, a Daisy Duck that's exerted, I will end up taking out the Daisy Duck and taking 1 damage in return, right? Because I will have the 4 strength by the time, because this character is exerted first and then the challenge happens. So he counts for himself to be exerted. So the Mulan plus the Coachman being exerted means that he will get the 4-2. The reason that this is important is because you will not get the evasive, right? So when you choose the challenge target, let's say you try to challenge a 1-drop evasive, you won't be able to do it because the Mulan is exerted and then the coachman has no target because he doesn't have evasive yet. So when you turn him sideways, he has to challenge a non-evasive character because you have to declare the target that you're challenging. And then after he's turned sideways, then he gets evasive, right? So you can't be like, I'm turning the coachman sideways, give him evasive, and now have him challenge your like, let's say, Pegasus gift to Hercules, right? The 1-drop evasive emerald card. So it matters because the strength will proc for the challenge, but the evasive will not before the declaration of the card that you're challenging. So you can get some really cool interactions with this card. Of course, this thing getting evasive after there are just 2 cards on board that are exerted is really nice too, because that means it can challenge things like Diablo, and being a 4-2. Yes, it gets traded out by the Diablo, but it will take out a Diablo on a Cove, and that's really, really strong. Of course, as usual, against Emerald Steel, like the Diablo will likely sing something like a Storm Rage or a Strength that will take this out, and that's unfortunate, but you do have some counterplay against it. The Mr. Smee we already explained, great synergy in this deck in particular because of the 1-3 captains. Li Shang, you could opt to play 4. This card is the answer to Prince John. It's the answer to Muses when it has damage, because when it has damage, it is a 4-3. But it is fairly susceptible to just being removed as soon as it challenges once or twice. But to be honest, that's all you need, right? It's a big investment for somebody to play a Prince John, and you being able to take it out with this card is pretty good. What I will say though is, it's pretty telegraphed. You drop this on board, they're not going to drop a Prince John until they deal with this card. So you almost have to keep this in reserve if you're going up against Emerald Steel discard, and this being uninkable. Like, I mean, Ruby Steel needs all the help it can get. This card should have been inkable, but whatever. Like, it does counter synergize with the deck because you need to play your uninkables not as soon as possible, but you need to play them out because you need no cards in hand to proc the Desperate Plan. So it is a little unfortunate that, if you're going up against Emerald Steel discard and you're like, okay, I'm going to play this Li Shang because it's the 3-cost uninkable. It's the best card I could play on 3 right now. And then your opponent's like, oh, okay, like I'll just wait and, strength this away and then play my Prince John. And then you're like, okay, now I need to see another one, right? So if their Prince John is on board first, that's fine. You drop this afterwards. The issue is this does not have rush, so not being able to take out the Prince John right away, right, hurts, because then they can maybe try to set something up or, again, play to out this card. So unless you set up like the Mushu first and then see the Prince John and then drop the Li Shang, and anything that requires a 2-card combo is not really super realistic to rely on all the time. So for that interaction, like, it's why this deck still can struggle into the Emerald Steel discard. It's a little unfortunate, but that's just the way that these cards were designed, unfortunately. It would have been really cool to have this deck be the deck that just answers like the discards, right? It would have been really, really cool to see that, because then this deck would have seen play despite it not having much counterplay into maybe the rest of the meta aside from aggro. Like, this deck, I would say, struggles into control. Like, there are some things you can do, but we'll discuss that in a little bit. So in this variation, like I said, it is a Mushu oriented version. So the 3-drop Mushu here is what we're playing. The rush ability or the ability to give rush to something is nice because you can give rush to things like Stitch. You can give rush to things like this bigger Mushu that doesn't shift, like to Namaari, which comes down as probably a 4-5 or a 7-5 or something big like that, and can just instantly take out a huge threat. It can give rush to this Maui shark, which we know how good that is, right, with the Peter Pan Shadow Finder that people run in Ruby Amethyst. So there's a lot of utility here, right? If you can give rush to the Coachman, and the Mushu itself being exerted means that the Coachman, when it exerts, immediately gets the 4 strength boost. So there's a lot of cool synergy in this deck with this Mushu Fast Talking Dragon that you can use. Other than that, though, it's fairly underwhelming, right? It hits the board, it doesn't do anything, it's vulnerable, it's understated. It doesn't do too much other than that, but thankfully you do have a lot of combo pieces with it. You are playing, of course, 4 Peats. Again, another key reason to play Steel. And unfortunately, only 4 1-drops. or sorry, geez, yeah, 4 drops is what I meant to say. The Stitch Alien Troublemaker, I've kind of come around on this card. I think it is kind of decent. I was considering Super Goofs as well, but that card inherently has Rush. So the goal with this is that, again, you play the Mushu, and then you play this character, you give this Rush, and then you can hopefully challenge and get your card draw, take out a threat, and gain a lore. The lore gain isn't really too meaningful. It's the drawing the card that really matters. But again, that's a 2 card combo that you need to hopefully see the Mushu. This card in isolation, though, and I've talked about this before in the blue steel list, is not bad to drop because it kind of checks your opponent's board, especially if they're on a lower end package where they have a lot of weak vulnerable characters. Now all of a sudden you're threatening to take out multiple characters, gaining lore and drawing cards in the process, and that just might stall your opponent out a little bit until they have a direct answer to this thing. So not bad, but yeah, only playing 4 drops means that you are likely to miss playing ideally on curve. But again, you're basically saying instead of playing 4 of another 4 drop, I'm playing 4 Mushus. So even if on turn 4 you drop a 3 drop, it's totally fine because your goal is with only 9 uninkables, you're just going to try to dump your hand out as quickly as possible to make the desperate plan live, right? This is the same strategy, not exactly the same because the blue steel version I think does it more consistently because you have way more cantrips with like popsicles and Tamatoa recur popsicle and things like that. But you do have the Mulan, you do have the Namaari in the steel package that can help sift through the deck. One of the best cards in Ruby Steel undoubtedly is Mushu Majestic Dragon. Whenever one of your characters challenges, they gain resist +2 during that challenge, meaning that a lot of your things will survive. And then whenever one of your characters banishes another character in a challenge, you gain 2 lore. Where this card can really do a lot of work is with the Li Shang. If you're able to keep this card on board long enough to have it threaten what your opponent has, and then you drop this Mushu, now all of a sudden this Li Shang, even if it ideally if it has 1 damage on it already, so it's a 4/3 is how you want this to set up, and then you just want to keep this readied up and protected because the strength is what really holds this card back. But if you're able to get it with the 4 strength on it, right, so he gets the +2 strength, he becomes a huge threat. And then with the +2 that he gets from the Mushu, this card can just start taking out a bunch of threats really efficiently. And it makes it really hard. Like I think that's how I beat the Emerald Steel, not Emerald Steel, the Steel Song player. Is I did end up getting this setup, and like obviously all of their singers, like the Ariel, the Ursula, the Troubadour, or whatever, just gets absolutely clapped up, right? Because they sit in the ready state waiting to sing their songs. Then all of a sudden, Li Shang gets the resist +2 from the Mushu. I'm taking out stuff. Their singers that are weaker can't really challenge back into this because it's dealing 1 damage. They would it's already a 4/3, so they would lose multiple singers trying to throw themselves into this. And just this being able to take out an Ariel that was readied and not take any damage in return. And then I have a 4/3 that's still on the board that, they have to throw multiple of their characters into or sing a song to out this, right? It's just like not great for them. So yeah, the Mushu is pretty good in this deck. The thing that hurts this card, at least in my testing too, is the fact that you don't get any strength boosts, and that's where this deck can really fall behind a little bit. This Stitch, this Mushu, this Coachman, even the Smee and stuff, like all of this stuff is great, but if they were able to get strength boosts when they were challenging, they would just be like, it would make the deck so much more viable. Because how many times you're like, oh, I just need that extra point of strength on this, right? And you could argue you could play things like, because there are a lot of Ruby cards that boost strength, Ruby Chromacon, Medallion Weights, Imperial Bow on the steel side, Training Staff, the new card that I think came out in set 8 as well. They do cost ink to proc the strength boosts. There's the Ruby Coil that whenever you ink you gain 2 strength. The issue is they all have some kind of condition aside from the Ruby Chromacon, which actually might be a decent option for this deck. The issue is in isolation Ruby Chromacon is just a -1, right? You play that item out, it doesn't do anything. Like it gives the strength boost, but in a lot of scenarios it's like it's not a card that does something for me in the immediate moment. It's again another combo piece, and if you don't have things to actually gain the benefit off of it right away, it just sits there and just neg ones you. And that's the problem with a deck like this. It just doesn't have enough ways to generate advantage. You can't afford to play those cards that don't immediately do something for you that's meaningful on the board. Like every card here, aside from maybe the Mushu, because you need another character to actually get benefit off of this, does something for you, right? These early 1 drops, they're a good card to play on 1. They contest the board. They have good strength, right? The Captain Hook with the Challenger, the Coachman is a good overstated body when you proc the ability, which isn't too hard to do. The Smee, best 2-drop in the game already. The Li Shang challenging the readied stuff is a very unique ability, even though it is fairly weak, still very good. Pete, stopping actions, and just a generically good 3/3 body. The Stitch, threatening this card draw is pretty good, but again, 3/4 is a little underwhelming, but again, these are all inkable cards. The Mushu, facilitating a potential board generating a board advantageous state. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out the words here, right? By trading positively into threats while keeping your threats on board because they regain the resist +2. The lore gain is nice and can help you catch up in certain matchups, but it's really the resist +2, having your character survive challenging interactions, that's really meaningful. Everything in here does something, and hopefully you gain the advantage. This deck, as you can probably tell, there's a lot of things that you want to see to combo off. Which means that it is very prone to disruption, right? If you drop this Mushu and you're like, okay, next turn I'm dropping the Stitch, giving it Rush, getting some advantage off of that, and your opponent's like, well, I'm going to Brawl it, or I'm going to Strength it, or something like that, and you're like, okay, well, that just messes up my play now. My curve is messed up. I have to continue to try to play, but I don't have a good line to follow up with, right? So there's that to consider. Once you get to the top end, though, this is where the deck becomes very strong. You drop this Namaari. It's a big body that's on the board, usually. Quest for 2 is going to challenge and likely take out anything that ends up being exerted. The Maui Shark, we already know the power of this. In combination with the Mushu giving it Rush is the strongest thing you can do, assuming that you have good actions and or songs in your discard that you can recur. But being a 7/5 body is very, very powerful. This thing being able to recur Desperate Plan is also very relevant. Haven't been able to proc that yet, but if you do, right, because usually when you play this out, you'll have at least 6 ink, obviously, but as you're playing more cards, you probably have 7, 8 ink if the game goes into a bit of a grind game. Then if you recur Desperate Plan, you play Desperate Plan, you draw 3, you're likely going to ink and then play out the 2 cards you drew, and it's just a massive tempo gain for you if you do get something like that off. And then 3 of the Mushu, your worst nightmare. So ideally, you do want to shift this because this card giving Rush, Reckless, and Evasive is pretty good. Again, no strength boost, which hurts, but making all of your stuff have Rush, your Namaari, your Stitch, everything that's being played after that is pretty good. You don't necessarily need to shift it, but the weakness of this card is the fact that it's going to take up all your ink for the turn, most likely, or take up a significant portion of your ink that you can't really follow up with anything meaningful. So what does that mean? It means that you play this, it has to survive a turn for your next character that is played to gain the ability for this, right? There is the chance that I guess you play like a 1-drop or a 2-drop that follows up and you get the benefit off of that, but then you have some counter synergy because like this already gets evasive, but you do get the strength boost if something is exerted. If you drop a Mr. Smee alongside that, it could be pretty strong, especially if you have this Mushu up. But again, it's going back to I need to have all these combo pieces on the board. I need them to all survive. What's the odds of me setting up this thing? And that's where the Mushu version of Ruby Steel can kind of fall down. For the actions and the songs here, I haven't tested the version since putting in Fire the Cannons, but I opted to put this in because I figured, this card always gets played at some point, right? It's a 1 cost, so even though it's uninkable, you probably get some decent value off this still. But normally I'd want to play an inkable card here, but I just threw this in because I was like, why not just have some more firepower to deal with board states and take out threats? Something like playing this in combination with the Li Shang challenging can really make the difference into outing something that's ready that you need to deal with. Ward characters aside that just sit in the ready state, mainly Prince John and Muses, this card can challenge down a lot of things that you would want to just take out anyways, and combining that with Fire the Cannons can be very relevant. So that's kind of part of the reason why this is in there. Plus, like I said, the lack of the strength on the Stitch, right? Playing the Fire the Cannons and using the Stitch to challenge to be able to take something out to proc the ability is also good. So you could argue you could sub this out for like training staff or medallion weights or something like that. But this being an action means it's also a cheap card that's recurable off the Maui Shark and can help you clean up board states as well later on in the game. So that's why I've opted for Fire the Cannons here. I did try medallion weights, I did try training staff, I did try Imperial Bow. And for this variation, I found that those just didn't work out too well. Probably because it's so ink intensive on curve. Like you're likely using up all your ink, so you don't have much left over to actually proc those abilities with those items which you need to pay ink for. That was just my experience. Maybe I just need more practice to utilize the ink curve better. But this is a one-time thing. You get the damage in right away. I mean, it's a weird concept to explain because like you're paying the same one ink that you would on training staff. I guess the difference is this card doesn't need a character to proc, right? Whereas training staff, you need to have the character that's being utilized with the strength boost. So like it's weird, but I guess in theory you could say I'll play training staff. I guess the other difference is you need two ink to play training staff and then one ink to proc the ability. So that also puts you behind on tempo, and I guess that's also where you kind of just lose gas, I guess, with this deck, right? Like it's just too slow to contest with some of the faster boards. The Desperate Plan is, in my opinion, the best card in the deck, because if you do get the plan off, I guess it is a Desperate Plan when you think about it, where you just dump your whole hand, you ink whatever you can, you keep inking every turn, and you're playing towards this card. Once you get this card off, it's like an insane advantage, because when you play this, you'll likely have at least 6 ink by the time you play out your hand, and you'll have 3 ink left over, and hopefully you draw into things that you can also just develop that extra threat on board, having 2 cards extra in hand for the follow-up. And then, like I said, once you develop the shark, now you're threatening, okay, like this is risky because now if I exert something, the shark can get back to Desperate Plan. Your deck is mostly inkable, so you're consistently dumping your hand into your inkwell, playing out whatever you can that's cheap, so that you can continue to have this card being live, whether you recur it with shark or draw it off the top, or sift into it off of like the Namaari or the Mulan. And again, this is where this deck can be a little dicey, because into discard, like you need to have a card in your hand, because if you have no cards in your hand, the Namaari procs to draw the card and discard whatever you draw first, and then you draw for turn. So you don't want to be like, let me proc Namaari with nothing in hand, and you draw a card and you're like, oh, I actually want to play this, but then you're forced to discard it, right? So you have to have a card in hand, which makes you susceptible to the discard decks, but hopefully you can answer the Prince Johns with the Li Shan, because you don't mind discarding the card, right? It's discarding the card when they have Prince John up that hurts you, because it turns your what would be a 1-for-1 trade, like I lose a card, you played a card to make me discard my card, but then the Prince John makes you go +1 off that discard, right? And that's just what loses you the game against the Emerald discard decks. I've opted for Smash instead of Brawl just because this card is more versatile. It can still deal with the Diablo, which is your main thing you want to deal with here. Even a Diablo on a Cove, whereas Brawl does not deal with that. You lose the interaction to be able to deal with a Genie, because Genie is 2/4. So you make that trade-off, but Smash I think is just more universally applicable, because similar to Fire the Cannons, like you can use Smash in combination with something else to take out a threat, whereas Brawl is just like if they have more than 2 strength, the card is dead anyways. So I like the Smash better in this deck. Yes, it costs the same 3, and it is recurable with the Maui Shark. In one of my losing games, I did smash something. It was a really good play, and it almost got me back into this game. But I smashed something. Shark took out something because I had no actions in my discard when I played the Shark. And I guess you could say my draws were not great, because if I would have had a discard, it would have made my opponent maybe not exert stuff. But they exerted their characters. I think they quested, and I drew, and I was like, okay, smash one thing, and then Maui Shark take out what was another thing that was exerted, bring back the smash, and play it again. And I almost cleared a board with that, but I was just too far behind in that match to come back. This was an interaction that could have got me back into the game. But yeah, reoccurring smash is really good. It's inkable, so that's also great. One, I'm still here. Not sure how I feel about this, but giving the resist +2 is nice. You could argue that being able to play an action that gives strength could be nice, because it's also recurable with the shark. But the I'm still here, the goal with this is that you give the shark the resist, and then he can recur it. It's also a draw card, so not only do you get the resist +2, mitigate the damage on anything, but usually a Maui Shark, it can also mitigate damage on the Coachman, which could be good. You draw a card, and that's really good, right? Because if you're able to recur it with the Maui Shark, you just have another cantrip back in your hand. I was going to try the One Last Hope, the card that gives heroes resist +2 and the ability to challenge readied characters, but it being uninkable, it just really hurts, because then you're forced to just play it, which it feels really bad, and then you're forced to play it if you want to get your Desperate Plan off, and it just doesn't work. It just like is more counter synergy with the deck. This being inkable makes all the difference, because you can just ink it and still proc the Desperate Plan if you need to, if you're in a pickle and you're like, I just need to get this plan off. And then of course 4 strength, probably the best action in the deck, simply because it's a song. You do go wide with this kind of mid-range deck, and you want to proc the strength to take out a threat where you can. These cards being songs means they are rippable with Ursula. So when you're playing against the Emerald decks, you have to know when to ink this. But it should be pretty apparent. The strength of this deck is if you're upping into an aggro meta, this deck just absolutely goes ham into those decks. It can do really good work potentially into some of the Emerald decks, into other Steel decks, and it does struggle a little bit into mid-range and control decks simply because in those grind games they might be able to outdraw you and control the board state a little too much, right? Like the Elsa tap down hurts you because it comes out of nowhere and it messes up your game plans. Like I was saying, you need to set certain things up, and when those setups get disrupted, it can, by control decks, it can mess you up a little bit. Crabs coming into play, boosting up characters that can trade up hurts you a little bit as well. Because then they end with a crab that's a 3-cost singer, but also a 3/3 body, and their lower cost character took out one of your higher cost characters potentially. So all those things kind of hurt you a little bit. But it's not an unwinnable matchup. It's just a little bit of a harder matchup. And the other thing I want to take a look at is this variation, which I think is more competitive, and this one is the one that's private right now. While the Mushu stuff is nice, I do think if you were looking to be more competitive, this is the version you may want to go with. This one plays much more like a mid-range deck because you're evenly spread across the cost curve. You're not playing the Mushu stuff. You're simply just playing good cards that are in both Ruby and Steel. You are utilizing the Super Goof in this variation. This comes in, gets lore. You're a much more aggressive oriented deck with this one. The Stitch and the Goofy are your 4-cost characters. The Goofy, you could argue, is potentially a card you want to play on 5 instead of 4, which makes it that you have essentially 12 5-drops and only 4 4-drops still. Like, this card coming down on 4 is still okay, but the reason I say that is because in this variation we are playing the Imperial Bow. Depending on the metagame, you could play more of this. I wouldn't go more than 3 though. In certain matchups, you do want to try to find this mulligan for it, or make sure you don't ink it if you have it, because this card can facilitate quite a bit in this deck. You have, not that you would need to ever use it on the Maui Shark, but you could use it there, on the Beast Tragic Hero, on the Stitch, on the Goofy, on the Mulan, on the Li Shang. And it's really using it on the Li Shang that is gangbusters. You play 4 of Li Shang in this version. You're only on 8 on Inkables. You're not on Fire the Cannons or anything. You're still on the Desperate Plan Namaari kind of combination. But this card giving Li Shang +2 strength and evasive solves the problem with this deck, right? But the problem is you need the setup. It's a lot harder, and there's not a lot of item hate in this meta. So seeing this card and setting it up is usually going to be pretty safe. The issue is, again, it costs 1 to use. But giving the Li Shang evasive and making it a 4/3 is absolutely insane, because this card then just takes down everything. It takes down readied up Diablos. Not that Diablos would be readied, but you can take them out when they're exerted, right, with the evasive, whether or not they're on Cove. You can take out Muses, you can take out Prince Johns, you can take out a lot of things. Yes, it's telegraphed because you have no way to proc rush on these cards, no Mushus to do that. But this card coming down and just threatening that allows you to play out on curve, makes your opponent double think what they want to play. And in this variation of the deck, it's really strange to say, but this small nuance really matters. This card coming down on 3 and stopping your opponent from playing the Prince John potentially in this variation actually matters a lot more, because as you play on curve, you're aiming to get out your Beast Tragic Hero to facilitate card draw, and you're not worried about having a hand because you're like, I don't care if you discard my hand if you don't have Prince John. We're still trading 1 for 1. You're using up cards, you're using tempo, you're paying ink, you're singing songs to discard my cards, but you're not gaining advantage off of it if you don't play your Prince John, and that's fine. So in this variation, playing out the Li Shang to stop the Prince John actually helps, because you don't mind playing to, I'm going to draw cards here, right? Playing out the Imperial Bow, having evasive on something like the Coachman, giving evasive to the Goofy, which can also out the Diablo, helps, because now, again, you're not worried about drawing cards with Beast Tragic Hero during your turn. You're not worried about proccing the Desperate Plan, because the Diablo isn't drawing when you're drawing. Your opponent's not drawing off of Prince John if they don't play it, if you have the Li Shang up. And it also kind of checks, if you get this setup going, it also kind of checks the Muses. Again, you are susceptible to things like Strength of a Raging Fire, which people will likely do, right? They'll build up a board to strength the Li Shang. But hopefully you'll be building up a board as they're, kind of stalled out. And your goal is eventually, let me get out this Maui Shark, and now anything you turn sideways, I'm going to get back brawls and smashes. And you can see we're opting for both in this variation, because this one is much more geared towards, let me just play the cards that out the opponent's board, so preventing you from building up boards in those steel matchups, right? You're going to try to build up to get that strength off or something. I'm going to brawl away. I'm going to smash away your characters. I'm developing my ink. I'm building towards my plan of the Desperate Plan here. And once I get that Maui Shark on board, good luck. Turn your stuff sideways. I'm going to proc my removal recursion. All of these cards. 4 strength, 3 and 3 of smash and brawl. That's a total of 10 removal actions. 4 of which are songs, pretty strong stuff. And of course, you can always recur the Desperate Plan to draw extra cards if you need to. So a little bit more of an efficient version, in my opinion. Again, didn't test this one too much, but where I did test it, it played better, it felt better. The cost curve here, like I said, is a lot more even. The Mushu stuff is nice, and it is very strong. But again, when you're looking at practical interactions in the metagame, this stuff just matters a little bit more. There is a case to be made to say, like, where can I utilize getting the rush ability? Where can I utilize getting more strength boosts? Where can I utilize getting more evasives? And I mean, the Imperial Bow giving evasive is meaningful. Like, the Imperial Bow on the Stitch is also pretty nice, right? Like, if you get the Imperial Bow down early and then you have the Stitch or the Goofy on board, right? You play the Li Shang the previous turn or something, like, you have a lot of cards that your opponent's just like, I don't want to turn my stuff sideways because you're going to have the strength to overcome. You're going to have the ability to get the evasive ability on your characters. And these cards have really strong abilities, right? Gaining the lore on the challenge, becoming a 4/4 body, becoming a 5/4 that draws a card and gains a lore. Very strong thing to have on turn 4. And then again, the Li Shang becoming a 4/3 potentially. I would have liked to fit a third one in. Maybe you go to 61 and just fit in the third one here. I don't think you want to mess with any of these ratios. I think you still want to play 8 of each costed card. You want to play 8 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, 4-drops, 5-drops, etc. Like, it's a mid-range deck, and if you get this cost curve out, it is very strong. And then you have utility options in the back, right, to deal with the biggest threats that you might run into. So this variation, I think, is a little bit stronger. It's crazy that little tweaks, right, like just removing the Mushu package and putting in more utility-oriented cards like Beast, like Goofy, replacing the Mushu cards, which are decent, but it does make all of the difference, right? And again, the main thing is this one is while it is still, I guess you could say, a little combo oriented, because saying that all these cards work so well once you get an Imperial Bow up that's only a 2 of in your deck sounds crazy, but it's a lot harder to out this card than it is to out the Mushu characters, right? And disrupt that game plan, because this card just sits on the board and it has synergy with everything, right? And I've talked about this in previous deck profiles where combo decks are the strongest when you don't need exactly 1 and 2 things to make the combo work. Your combo can say, like, I just need to see one card, and it can work with 7 different cards in my deck. So it makes the ability the probability of you actually getting your combo plays off a lot more viable, right? Because I don't need exactly Mushu to give exactly Stitch Rush. I just need the Imperial Bow, and if I see any of my heroes, I have a very strong play into whatever your board state is going to be. It's going to stop you from turning stuff sideways. It's going to allow me to build up my board. It's going to allow me to proc my removal. It's going to allow me to build up to my Maui Shark more safely. It's going to stop you from playing some of your key combo pieces like the Prince John maybe, or the Muses, and get your game plan online. And I can force an interactive game state where even into discard, like, you can discard my cards as long as you're not drawing. And if you want to play your Prince John, you're going to be threatened by the Li Shang. So again, still dependent upon seeing certain interactions for certain matchups, but you're a tempo-oriented deck that wants to scry. So again, the Mulan, the Namaari, again, weaker than the Sapphire version, but still applicable to be able to get the Desperate Plan combinations off. All right, guys, that was a lot for Ruby Steel. If you're still with me, hopefully you enjoyed this explanation. But in testing, this is kind of what I found, I guess. It is a hard deck to try to make work. Don't get me wrong, but you just see the utility of what it means to play cards that are in isolation, just standalone good cards, right? Like the Beast Tragic Hero and things like that. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. This one's probably kind of long, but let me know if you made it this far. Thank you again for watching. Drop a like if you did enjoy it. Thank you again. Quantum is out.